We are interested today in an obscure little movement tracing back to the 3rd century called Manichaeism. We wouldn't care a bit about Manichaeism. We wouldn't mention it, probably wouldn't even know about it, but for the fact that Augustine was for 9 years a member of the Manichae movement. And that does seem to have shaped a little bit of his thought, and we're going to be spending time with Augustine, of course, soon enough. And so in order to set up kind of an understanding of Augustine, we're going to do a little bit with the Manichees. Ever come across them before? Is this anybody ever heard of the Manichaean heresy movement? Is this brand new? Jacob, ever heard of the Manichees? Never? Megan, Manichees, Spencer, Manichees?
Sydney thinks we have, but I don't remember.
Sydney thinks so. Manichees rings a bell?
Yes, I don't remember.
Don't remember anything about it? All right. Well, this is more than you ever wanted to know about the Manichees, but you do need to know it. So here we are. The founder of the Manichae movement is a guy by the name of, oddly enough, Mani. Kind of makes you wonder about somebody's mother, you know. But he lived from 210 to 275. Some people have argued that the term Mani is not really a personal name, but is more of a title of respect connected with Persian culture, and it was indeed a Persian religion, so that may be the case. Hard to say. But in any event, he took that title for himself, and he founded this movement in the year 242. 242 in Mesopotamia. The word Mesopotamia means what's the answer, Krista? I've always wanted to test the experiment of multitasking. Can somebody talk to their neighbor, be fully engaged in a side conversation, and still hear the question that I asked? So, Krista, let's hear it. What's the answer? There's nobody back there. I'm up here. What do you... That is so wrong. That makes me feel so much better. I now want to establish that women are not able to multitask. Hey, we finally have established by scientific, strict analysis that women are as... Well, I'll just leave it right there. What is the answer to the question? Do you remember, Spencer? You engaged in a side conversation here, you know?
I know the question. I know that something to do with good earth or like...
No, yes.
Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent.
No.
2 rivers.
Yes, close.
Between the rivers.
Thank you. Oh, man. All right. So, which has nothing to do with Manichaeism, but, you know. All right. So, Mani, actually the founder of this, claimed at an early age, probably in his teens, to have received a great divine revelation. Not unlike many religious leaders who've come along. You know, usually it's in their mid-teens that they claim that God came and said something special to them. Muhammad made that claim. Buddha made a claim like that. Others have made similar claims. So at this point, he's kind of, following pro forma, the style of religious movements. His claim, however, was interesting. He claimed in the year 242 to have been told by God that Mani was the coming Paraclete. I almost said parakeet. That's not it. Paraclete. What is the paraclete? Greek parakletos. What is that, Ben?
Well, we know it to be the Holy Spirit.
Yes?
It was when Christ was descending into the clouds, he said, basically, he's going to send someone after himself.
Okay, that's right. He actually made that statement in the upper room. We have it in John's Gospel, chapter 15, 16, to some degree in 14. Jesus says, I will not leave you without a parakletos, an advocate, but I will send one. And we read that text and gather that's the Holy Spirit, who we would assume came on the day of Pentecost. But Manny said, nope, you got that wrong. I am the parakletos, you see. And he claimed to be finalizing a succession of religious personalities, prophets, that include the following: Zoroaster, Hermes, Plato, Buddha, and Jesus. So Manny claimed to be the end of a line of luminaries. Zoroaster is associated with what religion? Who is Zoroaster connected to? Stephen?
He's connected to Zoroaster.
Zoroastrianism. That's very good, yeah. Yeah, and what, can anyone give you any more data than that Zoroaster is connected to Zoroastrianism? Any part of the world that that's associated with? Do you know, Laura?
Do you think it had to do with the ziggurat idea? Is that what it did?
No, really it doesn't. As far as I know, it doesn't. You're in the right part of the world. It's usually connected with, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say it's Babylonian.
Actually, it's Persian. It's Zoroaster was the founder of the Persian religion, and the great Persian god Ahura Mazda, which is not a car. It is a god. It goes back to Persia. Was the religion really founded by Zoroaster sometime around 1000 BC. Hermes, who's that? Who is Hermes? Nicole?
He was the Greek messenger.
That's right. So the Greeks make it to the list in the person of their famous god Hermes, known to the. This is the Greek name. What's the Roman counterpart to Hermes? His name is
That's Mercury.
Mercury. I think is right. Yeah. All right. Plato. You all know Plato. Buddha. When does Buddha live? What's his time frame? Anybody know? Generally, do you know, Jacob? Buddha? No? Anybody? About, 3rd, 4th century BC. And Jesus, you've all heard of Jesus. So he claims to be the final great leader, actually greater than Jesus. So Manny has some pretty extravagant claims that he makes on his own behalf, and so on. Yeah, Sydney.
How would this kind of get started when he has such a melting pot of Greek gods and
Yeah.
all this stuff?
Oh, it's very common. This is really common, though. I'll tell you, the Manny reminds me a lot of a character who called himself Bahalua, who founded the religion that you know of as, do you know? He was 1800s, founded the Baha'i religion, right? And you've heard of the Baha'i religion, right? You know what's out there. And really, they're very similar. The Baha'i religion claims to be the religion that will unite all the other religions of the world. And so it wants to tip its hat to all of them. Tip your hat to Buddha, tip your hat to Zoroaster, all these, Moses makes the list. All of these different religions are supposedly now going to be united in this wonderful final expression of religious spirit. And so on. Well, that's kind of the way Manny was operating, and it's not uncommon. You see that on other occasions as well. Stephen?
Why did Manny think that he was a member of, why did he think he was a great leader like the other men that you were
one of two, I don't know him personally. Just didn't, make it to Persia that year, but it's either that he was a megalomaniac, it's possible. He was a extraordinarily convincing liar, or a fruitcake. I don't know, but one of the above, I think accounts for it. I don't know what else to say. It's like take your pick there, but yeah.
Do any of these guys who claim to have had an experience with God, when he said that they were a god or something, do any of them actually think they did?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. Muhammad claims that he was visited by Gabriel in a cave. Sun Myung Moon, you know that name, founder of the Unification Church, the Moonies, claims that God met him somewhere in Korea when he was 16 years old. What can you say? These people come along, they make these claims, and I'll tell you, Ben, if you make that claim about yourself and say it with enough fervor, you'll get some people to believe it. You will. You will spend eternity in hell, but in the meantime, you can have a great life. It's just the way it is. So anyway, I really don't know the psychology, except that certainly these people come along, they make these extravagant claims, and they get traction. They get people to believe it. And all of a sudden, you got yourself a movement, and it is kind of self-reinforcing. If I were to walk in here into this classroom and say, God met me last night and told me I am the Paraclete. I hate to even say this. Lightning might come in. You might want to stand back. But just by way of illustration, if I were to say that, yes, that's right. That's the proper response. But then I can say I'm being persecuted for being a prophet. I could get, not any of you, you're much too smart, but I could get some people to believe it, And I could probably get some people to sell their stuff and give it to me and give me a really nice life for a while, right before I dropped right into the pit of hell. I mean, it works that way. You can do that. And that's what happens. All history is peppered with these characters. So, this is one of them. Anyway, we wouldn't care about him. It's not that he was that brilliant. But it does just turn out that he touched the life of Augustine. And that made his influence highly exaggerated in the history of the church. And that's why we're interested in it. So anyway, he competes for dominance. He's trying to win over Christianity. He's trying to win over Zoroastrianism in Persia and various other religions. He doesn't really succeed. He gets a following. There's people that certainly believe in him, but eventually he dies in a Persian jail waiting execution. That's the end of Mani. But his religion continues. So it continues on beyond his own life. It is a religion that you would say is syncretistic. Is that a new word? Do you know that word, syncretism? You ever heard it? Anybody? Okay, learn this word. Syncretism is a word that applies to any religion which attempts to simply combine other religions. It's what I like to call cafeteria theology. You go into the cafeteria and you just take what you like. You take the parts that you enjoy. You leave out the parts that you don't. If I went to the cafeteria, I would certainly take, the bread pudding. I would leave out the yellow squash. I mean, we just go through and we kind of pick and choose what we like, and you can do that in your religion. And you can create kind of a little religion of your own design, and that's what he did. So it's a syncretistic religion. It had some affinity to mystery religions, which were very common in that time. It was fairly secretive. There was, in Manichaeism, kind of two circles. The outer circle and the inner circle. The inner circle was called the elect. The outer circle were called the auditors. The elect know the deep, dark secrets. The auditors are still learning. And only when they go through a fairly severe regimen will they be admitted to the inner secrets. Augustine was never a member of the elect, but he was an auditor for 9 years. Obviously, before he became a Christian. This would be when he was in his 20s. And so it did influence his thinking. Now, let me say it influenced it in a sense negatively. That is, he later repudiated and attacked vigorously the Manichaees. But some people think part of his thought was shaped, in a sense, by his negative reaction to the Manichaees. And I'll talk about why in a minute. All right, so let me give you the themes. There's kind of major themes in Manichaeism that I want you to know. One, first theme, dualism. We've used this word before, so it's not new to you. You all have it right on the tip of your tongues. When I say the word dualism, it immediately, Matthew, sparks in your mind the idea of what? What comes to mind when we speak of a dualism?
Is that idea of the body and the spirit?
That would be one form of dualism. What does the word itself mean? Well, let's take that. What would be a body-soul dualism?
That the body is imperfect and soul is perfect. And that there is
Creating.
something like that.
Okay, all right, that's the idea. There's something else that we need to kind of complete the thought.
Dualism implies conflict.
Conflict.
Body and soul constantly.
That's right. Conflict, possibly between body and soul, but dualism itself just means conflict. So anytime you hear dualism, you think of two forces at war with each other. Usually, they are either equal or nearly equal forces. A dualism is not descriptive of a contest between you and an ant. You will win, ordinarily, in that conflict. You know. But if the ant weighs 500 pounds, then it might look more like a dualism, you know, where you've got equal or nearly equal forces coming at each other in what usually amounts to an ongoing struggle. And so Matthew mentioned body and soul. Well, Plato had an idea of a body-soul dualism, in which the body and the soul have almost equal power and leave you in a conflicted state, right? It's kind of the experience you have when you come to philosophy. The better part of you, the more virtuous part, wants to pay attention. Listen attentively. Take good notes. Do well. But part of you, the evil, base part, wants to be distracted. Talk to your neighbor. Not pay attention. Engage in side conversations. Ignore the teacher. You see, it's a dualism. You know what I'm saying there? And you just have to kind of figure out which way you're going to go. Which side you're going to tilt with in this conflict. All right, well, Manny was a dualist. He gave us what's called, and here's a term I do want you to know, abbreviates UMD, ultimate metaphysical dualism. Ultimate metaphysical dualism. He's not the only one, but he's an important one who gives us that idea. What do you suppose an ultimate metaphysical dualism would look like, Trevor? What do you think? What am I describing there when I use the expression ultimate metaphysical dualism?
I would think of something higher than just body and soul, like good and evil.
Okay, good and evil is right. Usually the good, we'll say over here, and the evil over here are symbolized. What are the typical symbols that designate the good on the one side and the evil on the other? What do you suppose? Any idea? No. Sarah moves and I call on her. Go ahead, Mr. Dupree.
One thing is light and dark.
Exactly. Light and darkness. And so ultimate metaphysical dualisms usually have this notion that in all of the universe there is an ongoing struggle between two great forces, not just in us, but in all of creation, all of the universe. And one side is the side of virtue and light and goodness, and the other side is the side of evil and darkness, and those two are in this constant, eternal wrestling match. Sometimes light gets the upper hand, sometimes darkness seems to be winning, but nobody ever finally is able to squish the other one. It's always this ongoing struggle, and Manny was one of many who's given us an idea like that. Think about the movie Star Wars. All of a sudden I get everybody's attention. Amazing. Is the Force, as it's developed in Star Wars, reflective of an ultimate metaphysical dualism? Okay, Ben says yes. Sydney says yes. This Sydney is not so sure. Anybody want to take a position and defend it one way or the other? Is the Force in Star Wars consistent with what's called an ultimate metaphysical dualism? Ready? I'm over here.
I was trying to convince him to raise his hand.
Do you have an opinion?
Stephen knows.
Stephen knows.
I think Avery has a really good opinion also.
Yeah.
He's seen the movies so many times, but I think it would be because it's talking about like the light and the dark side of the Force.
All right.
Now that's like the governing cause
That's
of
right.
the universe.
That's right. That's the dualistic aspect of it, but it's not a true ultimate metaphysical dualism. How come?
One wins.
Pardon me?
One wins.
Why does one win ultimately? I don't know either. Yeah, he never finished. Lucas never finished his
No, why not?
his series, so we don't know. What do you think, Krista? Do you have an opinion?
People who were with the Force changed over to the...
That's true. You have changeover. That's right. I don't think it is. It has a dualistic aspect to it, but the problem is the Force is one thing, and you just have the dark side of the Force. It's not like you got the good Force and the bad Force. You've just got the Force, right? So actually, it's a little bit more of a pantheism than a dualism, but there's a little bit of an element to it. Anyway. Second feature, I gave you this word already, but I want to put it up here as a theme. Syncretism. Syncretism, as I said earlier, just means it's taking themes from various religious traditions, putting them together. This is absolutely your culture. This is kind of the prevailing paradigm for religion in American culture today, especially among people your age. You just sort of take the things you like. You know, you create a religion that really suits you. It's called designer theology. You just kind of, make it like you'd make some clothing that fits you perfectly. And, if the designer religion that I have for me isn't quite the same as the designer religion that Spencer has, it's fine. Because it's what works for me. It's what's true for me. And that's really, I think very much a part of your culture. Well, that was kind of the way Manny was. Jesus was viewed as one among many. Many different religious leaders that have come along. Jesus is just one of them. He believed in reincarnation. He believed very much like the Hindus would, that you've got this kind of repeating cycle that goes down. He tried to find a place for every major religion in his kind of pantheon of religions. As a result of that, the Manichaeans preserved a lot of documents that would otherwise be lost to us. And so you've heard of lost books of the Bible, you know, the Gospel of Thomas, and so on, some of these that are apocryphal, sometimes Gnostic. Part of the reason we even have those at all is because the Manichaeans hung on to them. And so we can see a little bit about some of the offbeat, religious thinking, because, thankfully, the Manichaeans actually kept them alive for us. All right, so anyway, it's syncretistic. Third thing that you should know about it, and this is of special importance for Augustine, was the so-called creation myth. His creation myth. This was borrowed largely from Christian and Jewish sources, and it goes something like this. God created Adam, and Adam was original light. In this dualistic conception, Adam is light. And he's in some kind of paradise situation. Adam, however, is attacked by the god of darkness. This dualistic paradigm, Adam is there, light, he's attacked by darkness. Darkness swallows Adam and the entire creation of light. Darkness kind of wins the upper hand for a moment. And then darkness throws up. This is your typical myth, regurgitates the light that it had swallowed. It's a little case of influenza. And out spews in the vomit the moon, the sun, the stars, and Eve. Eve has a little bit of light, but not nearly as much as Adam. She's a darker character. Not totally dark, but darker. She comes. You better close the door. I don't want the little kids to hear this. It gets worse. It's the X-rated lectures that we have to kind of be careful. Eve comes and offers Adam an apple. But of course, as you probably can guess, the apple she offers is her own self. It's a sexual offer that she makes. And Adam is unable to resist the overwhelming temptation presented by Eve. He succumbs, and they have intercourse. And as a result of that, Abel and Seth are produced, both of those sons who are more light-type sons, Then, however, Eve, who is really not a very... I'm sorry?
Is it Cain and Abel? Or?
No. I'm giving it to you. Here it is. She produces Abel and Seth. Those two. Then Eve, who is not a very virtuous lady, of course, because she has so much darkness in her, later has intercourse, sexual relations with Satan. And out of that relationship is produced then, Alicia, Cain. Okay. So all of the succeeding generations from Adam and Eve and Satan are men trapped in darkness, and God then has to send to them messengers of light, whose purpose is to free them, rescue them from the darkness in which they're trapped. And the messengers that God has sent through history include names, most of which you would recognize. Noah is a character that comes as a messenger of light to try to rescue people from the darkness in which they have found themselves trapped. Abraham is a messenger of light. Zoroaster is a messenger of light. Buddha, Jesus. But finally, the consummate, ultimate messenger of light, the one who's ultimately going to get the job done and free men from this bondage to darkness is, of course, our good friend Manny. Josiah, question.
How are all these people messengers of light when you're born of darkness?
Well, Manny's answer to that would be that God takes people of particular virtue and gives them more knowledge, you know. Now, Manny lived before Muhammad, but he would say the same thing of Muhammad. He would say that along comes these people with some kind of great spiritual sense to them more than most, and then they're given this additional help, you know. All right. Now, I realize that little story strikes you as a bit bizarre, and that's good. Of course, if you've read theogony, if you've read, classical literature, you know that this is not all that unusual, these kinds of rather bizarre and fanciful accountings for creation and so on. So it shouldn't strike you as too strange, but that was his little presentation of it. The thing, however, that is important to us is that Augustine, as a auditor of the Manichaees for 9 years, was deeply influenced by the thought of the Manichaees, particularly at the point of their view of Eve. Now, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but in church history, there has generally been a pretty negative attitude toward Eve. Adam is kind of regarded as, a guy that messed up. He should have been more stalwart. He should have been more backbone, that kind of thing. But Eve is often conceived of in the traditional art of the church and in some of the kind of thought of the church and the poetry and so on as a truly sinister character, a person who comes on the scene with a true dark side. All right? And that is just part of Christian history. It's part of the Christian lore, I guess I'd say. The New Testament doesn't really give you, in fact, if anything, the New Testament is rather sympathetic toward Eve. Paul says, she was, that Adam knew what he was doing and had greater guilt. Eve was tricked. He actually makes a little accommodation for her, But Christian history has been pretty severe on Eve, and it's been highly tempting in Christian history to take the story of the garden and restate it in sexual terms. Now, I don't know if you know that or not, but I'm just telling it to you now, that's been a very common way to spin that story. So that the way that what's actually going on in the garden is not this kind of innocent, here's an apple, Adam, why don't you take a bite, it's something like that. It's a vastly more profound temptation that's being offered to Adam. And had he protected his virtue, he would have resisted that. That she comes on here offering something that is decidedly a kind of evil, namely the sexual temptation. And so this is the Manichaean outlook, and this really does get into the thinking of Augustine. And so what you find in Christian history, and you really find this in Augustine, is a very negative view of Eve in particular, and then a not so negative, but definitely visible, negative view of women in general. All right? Now, I don't want to say that too strongly, because I think Augustine, you can overstate this case, but it's certainly present. And it creates an interesting little kind of paradigm in terms of how you understand. It's the development of some thought. Here we have Adam and Eve. All right? Now, in the New Testament, we hear that as there was a first Adam, there was a last Adam. Right? You're familiar with that. And who is the last Adam? Jesus, that's right. There is also a persisting idea, not so much in the New Testament, but in Christian history, that just as there was a first Adam, there was a first Eve, and just as there's a last Adam, there's a last Eve. Who is the one who, in a sense, repairs the damage done by the first Eve in this tradition? Her name would be Mary. Who we commonly refer to not simply as Mary, but as what? The Virgin Mary. You don't say that about Eve. She's the temptress. She's the seductress sexually. Mary is the one of sexual purity, you see. She's the virgin. The Catholic Church, of course, insists that she's not simply a virgin at the time of the birth of Jesus. She's what? She's always a virgin. The perpetual virginity of Mary. Why are they so interested in the perpetual virginity of Mary? Why is that such a big deal to them? Because there is this idea that any sort of sexual activity at all has a kind of taint to it. And they want to protect Mary from that. And it's given rise to a whole interesting ethic of sexuality, you'd say, in church history, where even in marriage there's a kind of a taint to it. That's still, to this day, a kind of Roman Catholic idea. Are you aware of that? Are you familiar with that at all? There is this kind of taint aspect. In the Catholic Church, sexual activity, even in marriage, has in it what the Catholic Church calls a little bit of concupiscence. Concupiscence. The concupiscent aspect of sexual activity, even in marriage. I mean, let alone outside of marriage. I'm saying even between a husband and a wife. There's still a little taint. Hence, to a Catholic, the only truly legitimate reason to engage in sexual activity is what?
So you get kids.
Children. That is the offsetting virtue. And therefore, the Catholic Church says if you engage in sexual activity without in some sense or other, an eye toward having children, then you are succumbing to the concupiscent aspect of sex, and even between a husband and a wife, it has a kind of sinful taint to it. So the Roman Catholic Church takes a strong stand against any kind of birth control. You know that. For that very reason. You see the logic there? And that's been with us, down through the history of the church. So anyway, you've got this view of Eve as kind of the seductress, and you have a sort of an equally elevated view of Mary. So Mary in the New Testament, from the Roman Catholic point of view, almost competes with Jesus for importance. You know that, don't you? From a Catholic point of view, you find almost as much celebration of Mary as you do of Jesus. And you have to say, and I'm saying this with a certain degree of hesitation because I love Augustine. He is one of my, all-time big deal heroes, and I'm going to speak very glowingly of his thought when we get to Augustine. But at least at this point, I think in fairness, you have to say this is one where he didn't do us a lot of good. This kind of emphasis on the negative aspects of Eve and the sort of compensating exaggeration of the virtue of Mary gave to church history an echo of that continues to this day, especially in Roman Catholic thought, not so much in Protestant thought. Do Protestants generally object to the idea that Mary, after the birth of Jesus, had a normal marital relationship with her husband, and that children were produced between Joseph and Mary that were brothers and sisters of Jesus? Do Protestants have a problem with that generally? Generally, no. We look at the New Testament, we see references to Jesus' brothers and sisters. We find those references. We actually find names of people who are said to be the brothers and sisters of Christ. You show those verses to your Roman Catholic friend, you say, what is up with this perpetual virginity of Mary stuff? I thought the New Testament said that Mary had some more children, and here they are, and they're the brothers and sisters of Jesus, so what's the Catholic response to that? Megan?
They would say they're just cousins.
Cousins, that's right. Or possibly children that Joseph had by a prior marriage. There's a very widespread theory that Joseph was an older man, had been married once, his wife had died, and he had children, and then he married Mary, who was many years his, younger. Say, it'd be like Joseph was maybe 45, 50 years old. Mary is in her late teens. That wasn't all that uncommon in those days. So Joseph eventually dies because he's a lot older, and Mary is left without Joseph. And the gospel narratives, Joseph kind of disappears from the scene. We don't hear of him anymore, presumably because he's dead. So anyway, there's a lot of side narrative there that tries to explain that. Mary is sexually pure. She's also, and this is, of course, part of Roman Catholic thought, free from any original sin. Why is she exempted from any original sin at all? In other words, the Catholic teaching would be that Mary never sinned. See? That she, from the time she was born, never sinned, nor did she have original sin. We would say everybody's born with original sin. We all come into this world already sinful. And if you don't believe it, just babysit a 2-year-old sometime. It'll, prove it to you. But the Catholic Church says that Mary was protected from even original sin. And what is the doctrine that teaches us that? I would assume you'd all know this. I see one hand in the air. You all know? Stephen, what is that doctrine?
Isn't that the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception?
That's correct, the Immaculate Conception. How many of you knew that? How many of you have heard of Immaculate Conception? Every hand in the room is up. All right. That's somebody we play, basketball with or something? All right. Soccer, sorry. Man, I'll tell you, what a... All right, how many of you knew, be brave, that Immaculate Conception is describing not the birth of Jesus, but the birth of Mary? How many of you knew that? Some of you? Okay, now you all know it, don't you? From this day on, you all know Immaculate Conception is describing the birth of Mary, not the birth of Jesus. This is part of how they protect her purity. And of course, their great interest in preserving the virginity of Mary throughout eternity, that she is always a virgin, is in some ways to fix this problem, which is a highly sexual problem, as they see it, connected with Eve in the first place. Comments about that? Is that any of you kind of aware of that already? Is this new material to you? Did you know this? Not really? Thoughts, comments, feedback? This is the Manichaean influence. The other one we're going to look at, which will be next week, not tomorrow, is the Neoplatonic influence. So there's two kind of pagan influences that shape, to some degree, the thought of Augustine, who's the next big guy we're going to consider. Manichees are one of them. And we're interested in the Manichees because of what I've just described to you. The other is Plotinus and the Neoplatonic movement, which takes place about the same time. And so we'll look at that probably Monday. Please. Thank you.
Why was Augustine so interested in Mary? Was it just because, did he always think women were kind of more evil than men?
Augustine, good question. If you know anything about Augustine's life, we'll talk about Augustine's life, but you may already be familiar with it. Augustine was converted at about the age 30, maybe a year or two later. And up until that time, he had not been what you'd call a paragon of virtue. He'd had multiple relationships with women. He had one kind of long-term girlfriend, but he'd had many others one-night stand kind of, things, if you're familiar with that term. And so, there'd been that part of his life. And he really, so you'd say from Augustine's point of view, women represented one of the single biggest impediments to his conversion. He wanted to become a Christian, but he didn't want to give up women. He was really, that's frankly it. You read the Confessions thoughtfully, you kind of see that sub-theme going through there. And when he finally did become a Christian, he really, almost as if to make it real, he had to cut himself off entirely from that whole relationship with any women at all. He sent away his long-term girlfriend and their son together. And, of course, he lived a celibate life from that point on. Well, if you ask me, Megan, I don't think that's healthy. I think God intended us to be in a marriage relationship, and I'm real glad I'm in one. And I hope all of you have that, wonderful blessing in your lives. But if sexual activity has been so constantly connected to your own evil inclinations, it's real hard to get over it. And I think for Augustine, he never did get over it. And so in some ways, Eve, for him, symbolized all the evil that women represented to him generally. And I think it did. I think it kind of filtered in an unhealthy way, not only to his view of Eve, to his view of women in general. Now, I'm psychoanalyzing this genius from 1,500 years distance, and I'm doing it very, very humbly, but that's my opinion as to what happened there. Arrivederci.